Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
The atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand.
It is our basic human right to be fucked up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis. Alrighty, welcome back to Occultae Veritatis. I'm Ood Gallifrey.
Sage Murray. Leon Filger.
And sitting in studio with us.
This is Kaylin.
And Richard Bigley.
Alrighty. So this is kind of part 2 of the ancient religions episode that we're going to look at Paleolithic spirituality. But first, we're going to need a little poison.
So, what's your poison?
We are day drinking.
Alrighty, so we have my lovely partner Daniel in here now. Now, for those of you that don't know, she is a bean water connoisseur, and she has earned something called the emerald headpiece, or what is it called?
Let's go with that, because I like that way better.
Okay, she's earned an emerald headpiece. It's a color and a clothing.
It's better than an emerald cod piece, though.
Oh, by the way, I'm Daniel. Hi.
Yeah. And she's going to lead us through coffee tasting.
A paired coffee tasting.
A paired coffee tasting, which is way too rich for my blood. So you take it away, Daniel.
Well, I work at a unknown coffee shop of sorts, so we are trying things from said unknown coffee shop. So I'm going to be real vague about this whole thing.
So what coffee is this?
A dark roast coffee.
Oh, yeah, you can't even say the name, can you?
I'm not even sure, dude. I don't want to get sued by said unknown company.
And what makes Sumatran coffee special?
Don't put hot coffee in plastic cups.
Okay, too late. It's okay. We got a robust insurance program at the podcast here. So.
We do not.
What's happening?
Injuries are not covered. You risk it by coming into the studio. Hot coffee may burn your skin.
Or mouth.
Yes.
I don't care about your mouth. I care about your sweet skin.
Holy shit, that's creepy.
I'm not sorry for that statement.
It puts the lotion in the basket.
Or it gets the hose.
It gets the hose.
I sent that to somebody someday. Like, just today.
Somebody someday in the perpetual past.
I'm sure I'll use it again.
I love how completely vague everything is right now.
Yes.
We're sticking with what you've established.
Okay.
That is fair.
Okay, Emerald Codpiece Coffee Wizard.
I thought it was a hat or something.
Yeah, I thought it was a tiara.
Take us through the
Emerald Codpiece, please. Let's keep on that.
Take us through the complexities of this black brew.
Okay, so we are drinking a brew from a coffee shop.
Just guess what it is, and you'll
Any random coffee shop.
It's a city in Italy that's not. I can't really say.
I'm sure there's a racehorse that's named this as well.
Okay.
It's very popular in Old English literature.
Yes, it is a main character from Moby Dick.
Also, Seattle seems like a big fan. Yeah. Seattle's a big fan.
Yep.
Okay, so you're going to smell the coffee.
What?
All right, smell the coffee. What does the coffee smell like?
It smells like coffee.
You're very right. It very smells like coffee.
Oh, I got a little on my nose, you know?
Don't smell it that close.
It smells a little sweet, actually.
I was trying to
don't snort it, man.
I was trying to analyze really hard.
All right, now that we've all snorted coffee.
Speak for yourself.
Oh, by the way, I'm using Sage's microphone here, so we're like really close right now.
Could I call it earthy?
What?
Could I call it earthy?
I think so.
I mean, you can call it whatever you want.
Yeah, would I be correct in calling it earthy?
Yes, it's a very earthy.
It smells like a first-degree burn in the nostril.
It's not.
Okay.
It doesn't taste spicy or smoky. I don't think.
Slurp the coffee into the microphones. Aerate the coffee around your mouth hole.
And not your ear holes.
Oh boy.
I hated that sound.
There's a lot of nice...
It sounds kind of moist.
Oh.
Moist.
This is professional.
This is very unaesthetic.
All right, so what are we tasting here?
Not spicy. Not.
It's really smooth.
Not not roasty.
Not roasty. It's supposed to taste sweet and chocolatey.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say chocolatey because there's brownies in front of me.
Spoilers.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to try it with the brownie, and then we're going to talk about the coffee a bit more. So do that.
Okay.
I'm so fucking happy right now.
Sounds like product placement.
Hold on.
It is not.
Product placement? We haven't said a single damn name here.
You get the fuck out.
Oh, that was almost
Man overboard.
You know, I bought a star on the weekend. Cost me about $1.
Oh, fuck you.
Don't chew into the mic. Oh, I hate it.
Yeah, we just lost 30% of our viewers.
And 1/3 of your hosts.
Oh my god, I'm so happy right now.
I only have one track. I cannot edit this out. I'm sorry.
Kind of getting that chocolatey.
That's darn tasty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. It's one of my favorites for sure.
Yeah, I'm getting it.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think I'm getting it because like it's being repeated.
Subliminal messaging.
You know what my favorite coffee is? It's coffee that's named after a lizard.
Sorry.
My favorite coffee from your coffee shop is the one that's named after a lizard.
You just discontinued a whole lot of coffees. Hold on here. Oh, right. No, that's totally fair. I gotta get that. Oh, okay. Yes.
Was it like
Oh, I know
named?
that one.
It's good. It's good for
It's
camping.
good with cheese. If you eat with cheese.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
It's called Newt Brew.
No shit.
Newt
That's
brew.
Yeah. Newt Brew. Oh, Newt. Sorry, newts are amphibians. I'm very embarrassed.
no. It's the perfect.
I want some Newt brew.
Perfect coffee for cooking over an open fire because it's just as smoky and roasty as the fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Anyway, that's all I got. I just want to drink coffee and eat a brownie. So like, have fun, guys.
You know, this is hot and it has caffeine. 10 out of 10.
Yep. Did you know that dark roast coffees contain less caffeine than light blonde roast?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I learned that.
I did.
The green beans have got the most.
Yep.
I always feel like I have to fight through the bitter to get the good stuff, but apparently not.
Nope.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, man.
I love you, Daniel. Love you.
And there goes Daniel.
I'm back.
Okay, what do the rest of you rate coffee?
10 out of 10.
Yeah, coffee's 10 out of 10.
No, it's 11 out of 10. I need it every day.
Yeah. It's not an enjoyment, it's a medicine. I need it.
Let's go back to this idea of religion and spirituality and how would we get that in the archaeological record? Because of course, if you think about that far back, basically we're working with stone tools. So there's not really much to go with. And so how do we start trying to move beyond that and actually look for these indirect clues? Well, there's three main things that people in my field tend to use when they're looking at that. And the first, of course, is burials with elaborate grave goods. So the necklace itself at the 120,000 mark, very interesting, very cool. But we can even take that a bit farther then and say, what about if they're putting lots of elaborate items into that burial? Impossible entities being depicted. So when I use the term impossible entities, we're referring to things that do not appear anywhere in nature. So there's no real world, like they're not referring to anything in the real world. So something that's like, say, half animal, half human would be an impossible entity. And then, of course, trying to identify magic and spiritual themes in the art itself. And this is on portable pieces and, of course, my particular area of study, the cave walls.
So last episode we talked about like a religion in the ancient mind, how it kind of forms in the minds of animals possibly, and how it formed in the minds of early humans possibly. And now we're going to go into the actual history of religion. So it's going to be all the religious stuff that we found in the Paleolithic era. And of course, I can't really say any of this is overtly religious because I can't get in the mind of a Paleolithic person. But I can say that this stuff may have aspects of it that are religious or artistic that kind of shares borders with religion. So I guess, as always, we'll leave the people at the table to commentary and provide their answers and guesses. Also, just to connect it a little more, I'm going to be providing both the year and the amount of generations ago, because I think when you think of things in terms of how many generations of humans ago things have happened, it kind of shrinks time a little bit, makes it a little more real. Okay, I'm not an expert, so take this with a grain of salt. So 300,000 BCE or 12,000 generations ago. That's 12,000 mums and dads ago.
How far ago is that in before Google's?
No clue.
We only measure time in BG now.
Okay, so BG would be like
Add another 2,000 years.
Like 11,999.
Yeah. So there's something called the Apatera Mountains, and they're not sure whether it's a garbage pit or a true burial. So there's a problem that a lot of these ancient tribes and ancient peoples were cannibals because they lived in areas where there wasn't much food and they were having trouble foraging, and unfortunately capturing a neighboring tribe and eating their people was very advantageous a lot of times. So a lot of the big surviving tribes either were full-time or part-time cannibals and when things were around. So they found these bodies that kind of look like maybe these guys weren't eaten. Maybe these guys right next to the garbage pile weren't eaten, they were just dragged there. And mixing the garbage pile with just body parts of all kinds of humans that have been, and they have the classic tool marks and the cooking marks and the char marks of being burnt, cooked, and cannibalized.
Cool.
Yeah.
Maybe they were just diseased.
Oh, it could be. That's one of the examples that comes up. Now, there's one where it's a bit more common. So you see that they drug a couple bodies right next to the garbage pit instead of right in the garbage pit. So that's arguably, is that burial? Who knows? Now, the next example is 130,000 BCE. So we're down to already 5,200 generations of people at Krapatina in Croatia.
Krapatina?
Yeah. Krapina. Krapina. There we go. Krapina in Croatia, which shares borders with Serbia and Hungary.
That's what you changed her name to. It used to be Shithouse.
Yeah, so it's a giant deep cave in Croatia, and they found a bunch of bones that had tool marks, they had teeth marks on soft bones, so they've been chewed on, and they had burnt bones and charred flesh. Now, in a totally separate part of the cave, way far away from the garbage pit, they found these bodies that were drugged there. And they were dragged there, and they were untouched by tools and human teeth. Now, they were still scattered by the elements and animals and scavengers, but the people that lived in that cave for thousands of years didn't touch the bodies themselves.
We're in Krapina, Croatia, and I'm with Vlaska. Now, Vlaska is a paleontologist here in Krapina, and that would be very important because this is the site of one of the largest collection of human bones ever found of Neanderthal man.
It was in 1899.
1899, okay.
When the Professor Dragutin Gorjanović Kramberg came to Krapina.
He came here, started to investigate, and we've got over 900 human fragments of bone and about 1,200 weapons.
1,200 stone tools from Stone Age period,
okay.
Yes.
Now that's really important because that means that Neanderthal man had a major presence here, and it's a good bet that if you're a white person, probably your relatives are somewhere around here. They probably came from this region at one point, especially if you're of European origin at one point. Now, there's a lot of discussion about Neanderthal. We're not sure we're descended from Neanderthals or not. Are we related to Neanderthal men, or is that a species that just evolved and then stopped and then something else took over?
It is also a big question because we have like a big chain, you know, but always you need some part which...
and that's missing.
Yes.
So that's probably the missing link, I suppose.
It is difficult, but today on some congress of paleoanthropologists or anthropologists have a lot of discussions about this, and Krapina is this memorial place for Neanderthals because we have the biggest collection in the world, and every paleoanthropologists want to come in Krapina and see this place.
One of the questions we can't answer is what they were all doing here. And specifically, I mean, was this part of an ancient burial site? Well, half of the world's paleontologists think it was. The other half think it could have been a cannibalistic ritual, and we just don't know that answer at this point. Which side are you on?
I think that the Neanderthal people are really people in that sense because they are not cannibalists, you know.
Maybe it was just cold storage.
Oh, maybe.
You
Deeper
know.
in the cave. Oh boy.
Just keep them fresh, you know.
That's pretty valid, actually.
Yeah.
You put it in the freezer in the kind of cold part of the cave, and you just
We call it the Ukrainian freezer when you put it in your garage.
And again,
Or the cold cellar. Yep.
and actually, exactly what you said was one of the proposed answers. Like, is this them
Yes.
separating these people from the people they ate? Is that some kind of spirituality? Is that some kind of special burial? Or were they dragging away sick people away from the main group? Like, you never know. Where it becomes a little more colored is the discovery of ochre, which is this colored clay that's naturally found in the earth.
Ochre.
Ochre. There we go.
Okra is like a gummy, weird-ass
vegetable.
Yeah, an orca is a whale.
So ochre is a mix of ferric oxide, clay, and sand. And depending on how rusted the ferric oxide is, it produces different colors in the clay. So there's 4 different types that are generally found. There are gold, red, purple, and brown. Ancient Paleolithic humans started using this in weird ritual-like processes. So 75,000 BC, which is only 3,000 generations ago, in the Blombo caves in South Africa, they started using the ochre to paint metaphorical symbols on the walls. There were a few things that may look like a person and may look like a shape, but most of it was just very symbolic abstract art, just slashes and dots rubbed in with this ochre. What's more is the cave floors in these Blombo caves in South Africa had almost an inch-thick layer of ochre in the bottom.
Holy.
Which means that they were using it so often in that one area, and they found examples of pelts, weapons, and even pieces of the skin of these people that had ochre just bathed in them. They seemed to want to bathe this red ochre in their bodies before they went out. Now, is that artistic or is that spiritual? Who knows?
Well, anything you're covering your body with that has a metallic overtone to it is going to shield your body from the sun.
Mm-hmm.
So it could have just been ancient sunblock.
Oh, it could have been. Yeah, and I believe that even elephants and stuff still do that today. They cover themselves in dust as a type of sun protection.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, a step forward. So things are starting to get a bit more. So religion and spirituality is kind of the evolution of processes. So it starts out kind of arguably spiritual and becomes more and more as you go on. So this is where it starts to go on. Now, around 42,000 BCE, they started finding a whole bunch of bodies that were covered in red ochre as they were being buried. And it makes sense. When somebody in the ancient world got injured or they got cut, red would come out. The red blood would leak out. And they know that once you run out of the red blood, you die. And according to some of the cave paintings they found later on, they theorized that maybe they were using this red ochre to try and give these dead people some of their blood back because they thought that they might need it.
So they were doing complete bloodletting and then trying to reestablish their blood with ochre?
Well, I think it was more like when one of their kind died from an injury, like say they were going on hunting and they got gored by whatever.
Oh, okay.
They were like, he lost his blood and died. Maybe we can try and give him his blood back by packing him in ochre. And they kind of packed him in almost like a mini tomb of ochre, just covered him up.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Lake Mungo in Australia, which happened at 42,000 BCE. So that's 1,680 generations ago. So getting closer and closer. They found the cremated remains of a Paleolithic person. Now, they didn't have the intense heat like a modern crematorium. So they had to do it in separate steps. So they had to burn them and then crush them and burn them and crush them over and over again until they were powder. They had to do it in all those different steps. But they found that the remains of the body were mixed about half and half with red ochre.
Cool.
And what made this significant? So it was added as a significant part of the death process, and this was wet clay, which would have made it harder to do. Mm-hmm. So they were making the process harder to do, and they went to great efforts to get this stuff. The closest source of red ochre, was 280 kilometers away. For a Paleolithic person, that means a 31-day round trip to go there and bring it back.
Holy shit.
Just so they could bury people in it.
Must have been important.
Yeah.
Right?
And and it starts to evolve further. You start to see these philosophical things. Now, remember I was talking about like being able to conceive of something that doesn't exist through tool use allowed like early man to conceive of imaginary figures.
Yeah.
The earliest example of that is the Lion Man, or the Lowenmensch figurine. This happened at 35 BCE, or 1400 generations ago. And it's this man that's standing. It kind of looks like I guess, an average humanoid, two legs, 2 arms, except it has the head of a lion. And it was carved from mammoth ivory with a flintstone knife.
Cool.
Yeah. And you have to remember, so they were playing with the idea of half humans, half animals back then. Mm-hmm. And that's the first example they've seen of that. And, like, you have to wonder, is this like a legend of theirs? Is this a myth? Is this a god? Or is this just a supernatural being? Or is this just the imagination of somebody? Next up is the first arguable symbolic burial. So the first one where it seems that they were buried with some purpose. That happened in Sunghir in Moscow, Russia. So this happened at 33,000 BCE, or 3,200 generations ago. They found a grave 2 to 3 feet deep with a juvenile and an adolescent buried head to head. Now they say there was plenty of room for both of them to fit in one hole. And remember, back then this was hard ground. This was hard, like, permafrost ground in Russia. Mm-hmm. So they had to go to great efforts to like cut open a hole in the earth for these guys, and they put in much more effort to dig 2 graves instead of 1. Mm-hmm. And that's the first time that it seems like some kind of thought was put into it, that both these people need their own space underground.
Interesting.
Yeah. And what makes 4 is they had both in their fists a bunch of these polished stone beads. So these beads that were rubbed against like sharper rocks over and over again, and then they get smoother rocks in order to make them polished and shiny. And it took like hours to make each one of these beads, and each one of these guys had their hands full of them. And again, their bodies were caked in red ochre.
I'll be damned.
Yeah.
Now we get to the Chauvet Cave. So you see that, like, how humans are treating their dead and how they're making art is starting to evolve. They're starting to kind of gain religious practices almost. Like, they're burying people with things that are valuable and take a long time to construct.
And in their own spaces.
Yeah, and in their own spaces. For some reason they thought each of these people need their own space to die, or their own space to lay in the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, then you get to the Chauvet Cave, which is in Chauvet Point de Canneray Cave in Ardèche, France.
After the climb comes the descent into the darkness and the silence. The Chauvet cave system is vast. We have to stick to the slim walkways that have been laid, weaving through the stalagmites and stalactites that reach out from the darkness. Witnesses to this unbelievable time capsule are rare. Until recently, the only humans to set eyes on this place were our Paleolithic ancestors, before a rockfall cut it off from the outside world.
Sealed shut for tens of thousands of years, this place was discovered by cavers in 1994 and then closed off to the public immediately. Very few people have ever been allowed in, but it's absolutely spectacular.
It's not only the ancient footprints and animal bones that excite archaeologists here. The most important features of this cave are also its most breathtaking. Hundreds of images adorn the walls, most of them animals. Drawn with charcoal and red ochre, they're surprisingly sophisticated, the artist seeming worked with the contours of the rock. They're so well preserved, they look as if they could have been drawn yesterday. But radiocarbon dating has revealed that they were painted 35,000 years ago by our early human ancestors. It's some of the oldest art ever found.
35,000 years ago, while this gorge might have looked the same, life around here was completely different. It was the Ice Age. Temperatures in the south of France were more like those in Sweden today. Beasts like woolly rhinos and mammoths roamed the land, providing the inspiration for these ancient artists.
Scientists once thought early humans were primitive,
but the discovery of the paintings revealed that creativity was already flourishing.
Chèvre Pont-de-Nez in Ardèche, France.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so that's what it is. So this happened about 30,000 years ago, or about 1,200 generations ago, and this is called the Chauvet Cave.
Cool.
So they have a bunch of paintings on the walls, and this is one of the first examples of cave painting and cave art. They had made all of different kinds of ochre. They had dots, squiggles, lines, and basic shapes. They had some things that look kind of like triangles, some things that kind of look like circles, some things that kind of look like ovals.
Cool.
Along with that, they also had 13 distinct species of animals, including horse, cattle, mammoth, cave lions, rhinos, cave bears, panthers, snakes, cave hyenas, deer, and bison. Those are the 9 that have been identified. There's still 4 that they don't know what animals they are, but they're numerous in the cave.
I find it notable that most of those animals are not native to France.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, you would have to say that they had to have some kind of communication system to hear about a lot of that. Mm-hmm. And it kind of implies that they've been going through trade and that maybe they've seen at least pictures of these things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And important enough for them to put them on their walls.
Mm-hmm.
Also included is another example of a half animal, half human. This one is a little more abstract, I'll say. It's a pair of legs attached to a giant vulva. So it's kind of the beginning of a Venus fertility figurine.
Women reign supreme.
Oh, yeah. And floating far above the legs with the vulva is a floating bison head.
That's where it goes.
Oh, yeah. And there's so many conflicting...
That makes more sense.
There's so many conflicting theories as to what the bison head means to the vulva legs that I'm not really going to go into it, but...
Vulva legs.
It seems like some kind of artistic effort was taken there. They're trying to tell some sort of... I don't know, some sort of message. And also these pictures told stories of volcanic eruptions, hunts, famines, and deaths. So as you go through this cave, you see these kind of almost comic book-like panels where they tell like the eruption of a volcano and like a famine that happened and all that stuff. 29,000 BCE, or 1,160 generations ago, they found the first real Venus figurine statues in Schechtelhachelein, Germany.
I can't help you with that one.
No, me either.
We'll go with Schechtelhachelein.
Just say it angry and then you're right.
Schechtelhachelein. There we go, Germany. Also known as the genus of the Hofels.
Ooh.
So it was found in a cave. Again, it was carved of mammoth ivory with a flint knife. You can tell what the person that was carving this was focusing on. It has a tiny head, about like a pebble-sized head. And then it goes out to like this giant, like voluptuous body with giant breasts.
Cool. There it is.
The buffalo vagina legs.
Oh, yeah.
Buffalo vagina legs.
Yeah.
Vulva legs.
Yeah, actually, if you want to look up...
It's not all that different than vulva donkey legs.
If you want to look
that
up...
old classic.
Actually, I'll pull it up.
Looks like something I drew in an elementary school bathroom when I was in
What
grade
did you
4.
Google to find it?
Venus of Hofels.
I'm going to look it up.
It has a very tiny head, like huge voluptuous breasts. It has like a fairly like big hips and a large vulva. It's kind of a classic fertility figurine. You can see what part they're focusing on.
Yep.
And of course, like
there it is.
And of course, they didn't have very good tools back then. Like carving back then, you didn't have a nice metal chisel. You didn't have something that could you would have to rub a slightly harder rock against a slightly softer rock until you made something.
Yeah.
And
This is pretty good. It looks kind of like a turkey, though.
Like, that was something that would take hundreds of hours. What would you put effort into hundreds of hours unless you thought it would solve a problem, especially if you're starving in the middle of a savanna?
Yeah. It had to have been important for them to spend so much labor on doing it.
Yeah. And, like, it's been theorized maybe they were asking the universe for a baby by, carving the image of, I guess a mother figure.
There, in the Museum of Blaubeuren, we find replicas of the best-known Paleolithic Venuses. But this one, the Venus of Hohlefels, stands out. Found in 2008, it is sensational for its age.
The Venus from Hohlefels is probably the oldest depiction of any kind of figurative object we know at all. It's the earliest representation of a human being, and it's the absolute root of figurative depiction as we know it. Later on, we see a range of animals being depicted. We can think of the animal depictions in ivory here, or the fabulous depictions from Grotte Chauvet of mammoths, of lions, and we can see a very clear connection between the Swabian finds and the depictions in Chauvet. What's also fascinating is, at this time, 40,000 years ago, we see evidence for musical instruments, a range of personal ornaments, mythical depictions that clearly show that these people had a religious concept involving the transformation between humans and animals.
This here is the original statuette carved from a mammoth tusk.
If we look at the Venus of Hohlefels a bit more closely, we can see very clearly, for instance, that the figurine has no head. Right? Instead of a head, the figurine has a ring. It was perhaps worn at times, suspended on a string of some sort. Also, the sexual attributes are key, which clearly link this depiction to ideas of reproduction, fecundity, sexuality, ideas that are absolutely essential to all of humanity, also today. It's also important to realize that at this time, much of Europe was occupied by Neanderthals. So we're dealing with a critical phase in human evolution where two forms of human beings are testing their boundaries. And what we find over and over again is that Neanderthals, although they're very sophisticated, they never had this kind of symbolic artifact, ever.
Then we get into 20,000 BCE, the prehistoric burials in Wales. Wales spelled W-A-L-E-S.
Like the country.
Like in England?
Yes, not baleen.
Or that's a type of whale.
Yes.
No, it's the whale, like, I guess, teeth, not, it's not teeth, it's baleen.
It's strings, it's baleen.
It's like little strings.
Silky things instead of teeth, and they filter plankton.
Yeah.
So this is talking about whales the place, not whales the animal.
Oh,
whales. Yes, that's all that we were talking about.
So this happened 1800.
I got you, Ood.
Oh yeah, I feel you. So this happened 1,080 generations ago.
Wow.
In something called Parkland Cave or Goat's Hole Cave.
Goat's Hole?
Yep.
That's fun.
Oh yeah. There was something recovered called the Red Lady. Now, when they did DNA analysis...
Is that like green boots?
Oh, could be. But they said there's something called... Oh yeah, you went to Cold Lake.
I went to Cold Lake.
You went to Cold Lake. Right. Yeah, so it was this buried person that was covered in ochre. Something that made that remain special was they put a gold ochre in her mouth. So they took the bright yellow ochre and put it in her mouth, and that's something that hasn't been seen before.
Cool.
She still had the red ochre like covering her body and all that, and she was also covered in carven items of ivory with symbols upon them. Some religious scholars have called them amulets, which really they could be, they don't have to be magical amulets, but they are like little discs with an artistic thing within them.
And they found like periwinkle shells.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, they found ivory rods, so nice rods made of mammoth tusks that have been polished, so that would take a lot of hours. Jewelry, that like precious stones, and periwinkle clam shells. Mm-hmm. They died of something young that broke no bones. So this wasn't a violent death. This wasn't the death of a warrior. This was some person in society that died with no broken bones, and they were buried with a bunch of things that took hundreds of hours to make.
And this person is female?
Actually, it was discovered that they were male. The people that discovered them first misidentified, but they're still known as the Red Lady.
Oh, because I was going to say, if it was female, probably childbirth. Especially if they go through all that process of like making all these things. Childbirth is really important because that's the only way to continue on life.
And that's a big reason why like fertility figures started to come about. Like making enough people to form a hunting party and to form a gathering party so you can survive was very, very important back then. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Of course... we're lucky enough in modern society that we don't have to like breed to survive. We don't have to give birth to enough people to like run a farm and shit like that.
Nope, we don't.
Introverts unite.
Yeah.
One and done.
One and done.
Yeah. So we're dipping under 1,000 generations here. So this is that's another French thing. Can you read that?
The Lascaux Cave in Montagne, France.
Montagne.
Yeah, so this
they make chocolate in Quebec.
Oh, there you go. So this was 17,000 BCE or 680 generations ago. So 680 generations of people ago. They found magnificent cave art. Now, before they had 12 animals, a limited number, and they had like short stories, like 2 to 3 panel stories, and very basic art, kind of very crude. This one used gold, red, purple, and brown ochre. Ochre. They also used ground up calcium for whites.
Oh, cool.
Charcoal for deep blacks and grays. They used geothite to make silver and reflective paint.
Pretty.
They used hematite to make oranges, and they used ground up manganese to make deep greens. Now,
do you know why they call it hematite?
Why so?
Because it looks like blood when it's cut open.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's cool. Most of these materials, so the exotic stones that they ground up to make those bright colors, they were found 450 kilometers away, which is a 50-day round trip for these people to get the materials to make these paintings. They used a bunch of things that would be surprising to see, like Paleolithic people using unstable. For example, they used 3D perspective. They used 3D perspective to show like one buffalo in front of another and like a landscape behind. So they were using that's something I didn't learn until I was like in art class in high school. They use shadows. They use motion lines. They use like sound representation, so like sound lines for something making a sound. They used the early forms of speech bubbles. They use pointing tools, like a bunch of things that we see in modern comic books and drawings, like were in this cave in France.
The first impression is that we are in face a fantastic art gallery done by, if not one artist, at least a group of artists again. I mean that it's quite homogeneous. Sometimes the painting are done over 1,000 years, and here I would say that it's a longer, several tens years, maybe 100 maximum. The density of engravings and paintings is very high. It's about 400 paintings, reading paintings, I mean animals and things like that, and 600 abstract drawings. And there are close to that 1,500 engravings. So it's really full of things. The second impression is that you are in a sanctuary, like a temple, like a church, like a synagogue, something like that. So you are really in a place which is a holy place. When you go in the cave, you change the level of your voice, like in a holy temple. There is a third impression, which is not it's noise, because all these animals which are balanced. I mean that what you see on the left, you can see it on the right, and so on. It's like a poem, and I have sometimes the impression that the animals are talking, are crying, shouting loudly from each other. So it's very, very noisy, but this may be only personal.
So each species was drawn multiple times. For example, there's 364 horses, there's 90 deer, there's 48 cattle, there's 128 rabbits, and there's 65 pigs.
Holy.
There's entire walls of this cave that are like a comic book where you can tell like 10-step stories with big murals.
That's cool.
The most famous part of this cave is called the Hall of Bulls.
Ooh.
And it's over 36 different like animals with their male horns and antlers and all that, like in full bloom, like they would be like in late spring.
Hall of Bulls is the name of my new dad rock band.
Oh boy.
I was going to ask if that's where you went to pick a husband.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Hall of Bulls.
Hall of Bulls.
Oh boy.
Fuck. That's before Tinder was a thing.
Yeah, you went to the Hall of Bulls.
I know bulls in a different anyways. Yeah, so they had 36 different species of these male horned animals. So just beautiful art, and art that showed an understanding of perspective and color, and like they had motion lines, and like all the stuff that we've come up with in manga and comic books today were represented there.
Cool.
And these are people who were still running around in animal skins, and they spent all this time and effort to make all this art. Is it religious? Is it artistic? Is it spiritual? Who knows, right? Then we get to one of the most famous examples called Göbekli Tepe, which stands for Beer Belly Hill.
Oh, that's fun.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like my hill.
Oh boy. So this was built around 11,000 BCE, 7,000 years before Stonehenge. So that's only 440 generations ago.
It's in Turkey.
Oh, yes. So at first, people didn't think that the hill was anything special. It was this giant hill covered in a bunch of mud and a bunch of dirt, and they just thought it was a standard Paleolithic graveyard. Somewhere where you would dig a hole, put a stone marker, bury a body, and that's it. They then started doing ground-penetrating radar to check out what was below. And they found giant rings. Now, each of these rings usually looks like a big outer ring with an entrance.
Oh, yeah.
And a smaller inner ring.
Oh, that looks so cool.
And they have...
It's like an anthill.
And they have stone pillars in the center of these circles that are 9 to 18 feet tall, 6 to 15 feet wide, and weigh as much as 100 tons.
That's wild.
Oh,
I've
yeah.
never even heard of this place.
Oh, yeah. So they started discovering more. They discovered one of these circles. So one of these giant circles, these circles are 70 feet across. They then started digging and digging more, and they discovered 13 football fields worth of these circles on this giant hill.
Mm-hmm.
And they discovered in all 16 giant circles with outer, inner, and middle circles. Now, this is a weird area to build it. Now, Stonehenge, it was near a waterway. It was near agriculture. It was built in a time where agriculture existed, so you could get a workforce. You could organize people. This was built when agriculture wasn't a thing yet.
Right.
And they were 40 kilometers away from the nearest source of fresh water.
Holy shit, look at these sculptures.
Oh, yeah.
Look. Gaze upon it.
So they would have to travel. So these Stone Age people who just have their feet to walk on, who haven't domesticated animals, haven't done the agriculture thing yet, are just hunter-gatherers, set up a workforce because they had to have people doing constant water trips to a water source 5 days away round trip. And they had to collect these giant stone blocks from 140 kilometers away, which is a 15-day trip.
These are massive too.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
And incredibly diverse and intricate.
And what's more, the land that surrounds it, you couldn't have maintained a herd of sheep or cow on it. It didn't have enough bionutrition to have grazing land. It was kind of like an arid area.
Like a nutrient desert.
Yeah. The only reason they decided to build in this area is because that giant hill is 1,000 feet above all the landscape everywhere else. So if you built arguably what could be the world's first temple on top of that hill, you could see the whole valley in front of you.
Yeah.
Göbekli Tepe seems to be the most smoking gun in archaeology at the moment. I think it's really true because we have so many unexpected and new results which are changing our ability to interpret. And we can see, or we can reconstruct, there was something like a community, a cultic community, Göbekli Tepe with its sanctuaries, no settlement, but settlements around here, Göbekli Tepe. And our zoologists can recognize from the archaeofauna, from the animal bones discovered at Göbekli and the other sites, that the early domestication of cattle was done in the Syrian Euphrates, sheep in the Turkish Euphrates, goat in the Taurus Mountains, and pig in the upper Tigris basin. But independently from each other, but very, very quick, all these discoveries, all these inventions had been brought together to something we called Neolithic package, and this Neolithic package enables the people now to be superior to their neighbors still being hunter-gatherers. And now the farming way of life was invented.
Again, it could be a security thing. Like, if you're the highest point, you could see everything else.
Oh, it could be.
You think they had the assistance of slaves or any, prison labor that they may have?
Extraterrestrial?
Well, see, that's the thing. Slavery is a byproduct of civilization. Like, you have to build a city and get organized before you can capture a neighboring city and enslave them.
Right.
So this was an age before cities, before civilization, before agriculture, before they started even domesticating any animals. Like, this is pre-cattle, pre-sheep, pre-goats.
Was it pre-donkey?
I don't know.
No, it's no fun.
Nothing is pre-donkey.
Really? That's awesome.
Oh, boy.
Oh, boy.
Now, the stones themselves are carved with animals, symbols, paintings, and what is more, the first example of astronomical star shape. So it appears like they were trying to track the movement of the stars on some of these pillars. They had a bunch of half-animal, half-human figures. They had examples of fertility gods carved everywhere. And there was even one of those comic book-like panels where they told the story of a meteor impact. Now remember that I said that this happened at about 11,000 BCE. There was a major meteorite impact at 11,000 BCE around that area, around that time. And it appears that this temple is telling the story of that meteor impact soon after it happened. So
that's insane.
So this could be an example of a meteor impacting these Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, thinking that it may be the wrath of a god upon them, and they built some big impressive temple to try and calm the god down. Or like you said, it could be security. It could be that they just have a good view of the surrounding landscape, and they wanted to make a fortress so they could watch out for other tribes. Mm-hmm. We can't get in these people's heads, but we can speculate a little bit. Yeah, so this is 9,000 BCE, or 360 generations ago. This is in Balkau Lake in Germany. So a hut was excavated on the edge of a lake. This is the first example of arguably worship, maybe. As the lakeshore goes, when the lake floods, it brings sediment in, and anything on the shore gets buried in the mud. So they excavated this hut that was buried in the mud around 9,000 BCE. They found a fist-sized fragment of a meteorite. Now, they knew that this thing could have only came from the outer solar system because of its composition. So it was a meteorite that did not come from Earth. It was an extra Earth object.
Extraterrestrial, you might say.
Yeah, extraterrestrial. It was placed on top of this intricately carved stone platter, and it was surrounded in a circle by staffs covered in blood made of bones, gems, paints, and teeth.
Awesome. Sounds like my house.
Oh, yeah. It was also surrounded in rings of grasses and plants woven. In one of the stones on the north side, it was actually had a carving of Ursa Major, like the constellation the Big Dipper's in.
Yeah.
And it matched what the Big Dipper would have looked like 9,000 BCE. There's also lots of...
Dude, that's so fucking trippy, imagining constellations looking different a long time ago than they do now.
Oh, yeah.
The last time I was in the psych ward, I had this idiot who I was with who was watching Cosmos because it had just come out on TV.
Yeah.
And I was trying to explain to him the fact that the stars move.
Yeah.
And in fact, they move very, 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 very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
But they're so very, 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 very far away that you can't tell.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But the guy just... No, couldn't handle stars being anything other than fixed points at a fixed distance.
Yeah.
The sun revolves around the Earth, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I looked at it like the bowl of the Dipper is a little more caved in because one of the stars is moving a little bit to the left, and the handle is a little more bent than it is now. And that's the change that it's made in 9,000 years. And
you ready for a really cool change?
I'm ready.
Okay, the constellation Orion.
Uh-huh.
Imagine the 3 stars in its belt.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Then on the left side of it, there are 3 other stars that drop down in his sword.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
The star in the middle of his sword changes colors because it is not a star, but in fact the Orion Galaxy or the Orion Nebula.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so as the nebula changes colors, that star too changes colors over great periods of time.
That's a magic sword,
right?
Yeah.
It is.
It's a magic sword.
Yeah.
I like it.
It was also covered in precious stones. By precious stones, I mean like pieces of gems and geodes that they may have polished or harvested.
Made them pretty.
Oh yeah, antlers, flowers, and also over 30 small animal sacrifices.
Cool.
So animals that weren't butchered, they were simply killed and placed in front of this chunk of meteorite.
Best way to experience space is get in a car with Richard Bigley, head down to the Regina Science Center, home of the Kramer IMAX Theater, get baked out of our skulls in the parking lot, and go watch Hubble 3D.
Oh, yeah.
Fun.
That's how I know how the universe works.
It's a scientifically valid method, I will assure you that.
It is.
Well, it can't be any worse than the CIA experiments.
Oh, no kidding. The last thing I'm going to touch on is the full-blown mausoleums made by people in Wales 5,500 years ago, or 220 generations ago.
Wow.
But 20 generations doesn't sound that far away.
You could track that if you have your DNA and accurate data.
Which we all do.
Oh, yeah.
I don't.
What? You're not on 23andMe? Okay,
I'm on Ancestry.
I'm also on Ancestry. Yes.
This sounds like an OV pod.
I got it as a Christmas present.
Oh. Okay, guys, the next episode I'm doing is on these consumer DNA services, because through these consumer DNA services, I was able to find 3 half-sisters, a half-brother, and my anonymous sperm donor. So I'm going to do an episode on it, and I'm going to try to bring those people in with me.
Oh,
that's cool.
I should probably go and just do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, get it done.
Yeah.
It's cheap-ish.
Brothers didn't want to have their DNA in the system, my one brother, so he's like...
They can still track them through you, because you're a close enough relation.
Yeah. These, you can see on the edge of all the major religions erupting. So all the major religions start appearing at about 3000 BCE. And on the edge of that, you start to see these really intricate burials in Wales.
This is Bryn Celli Ddu. Its history is long and very complex, and there's been a lot of debate over its construction. About 5,000 years ago, it was a henge, complete with ditch and bank, and to emphasize its importance, the central area was crowned by a circle of big stones. Then about 1,000 years later, it was turned into a huge chambered cairn, far bigger than is visible today. The ditch was filled, and earth from the bank was used to provide material for the earth mound, and to make the tomb, the circle stones were moved and reused, or broken and buried in a total destruction of what had been before. Another example of a total change of usage, a place being taken over completely and changed from an open place for the living into an enclosed place for the dead.
And we returned to Wales because, we figured out that they were doing some pretty fancy burials, like putting ivory rods and jewelry and clamshells and all that stuff with their dead. But they went a step further. They created these mounds of earth around these mausoleums. So they would build a mausoleum with this tunnel in it. You would pretty much have to go on your hands and knees to get in. And there was this central burial stone chamber where they would lay their dead.
Cool.
And then they would pile dirt on top of it, so it made just a little goosebump on the landscape. Mm-hmm. They've discovered 28 of these things in Wales.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
And these rooms are lined wall to wall with weapons, food, clothing, jewelry, carved stones, art, paintings, spices, and all of the art. Since they were in Wales, since they were likely fighting with Vikings or against Vikings, they had imagery of water battles, mermaids, the sea and storms, sea dragons, and all that stuff.
Cool.
So you can see that the burials are getting really intricate.
Super elaborate.
Oh, yeah. And next time I dive into this, probably in a couple months, because we have some things to do on our to-do list, but I'll start to talk about the births of the major religions, because 5500 BC, that's where the fancy burials in Wales. And then at 3000 BCE, that's when we start to see the rise of the religions. So you start to see the Egyptians take hold and build their stuff. You start to see the Epic of Gilgamesh come out. Sumer, the first city, forms in 3500 BCE, and with it, the religion of Marduk.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so
It's also a really good black metal band.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so we're going to learn about that shit. So, I'm sorry this got so esoteric, but I felt like we needed this platform to launch off of.
Perfect. I'm excited about you doing more shit in this vein, because it's fascinating.
Too. It's awesome. I love it.
Sweet.
Do more.
Oh, yeah. So with Occultae Veritatis, I'm Ood Gallifrey.
Sage Murray.
Leon Filger.
This is Kaylin.
And Richard Bigley.
Yes. Have a good night, and don't slip in the snow.
Yeah, cheers.
Love you, bye.
Bye.
And our palate cleanser for this episode is 100 Paper Washingtons by Alex Bozera. Enjoy, and I'll see you people in the after show. Hail Val.
10,000 US pesos in your wallet. There you go. You bet yourself you bought $1 for $1 less. You know, won't get no understanding from $100 note. Tell it to an auto, tell a seat before you float. Don't you know? $100 bills all lined up in a row. Get yourself a hooker for $100 less. You know, why be so plain demanding on $100 note? Just give it to the congressman, he'll take it for your vote. Floating down the river with your nose all full of flow. Don't need yourself a banker, there's a fortune teller that I know. With 100 paper Washingtons all lined up in a row. Forget that spot on Oprah and a ticket for the midday show. Don't you know? Less you know. Less you know. It's just $100 bill. Give me $100 bills. 'Cause there's some good ones and bad ones with stories to tell from those $100 thrills. Don't wash it with no soap. They come all pressed and laundered with some diamond rings and smelling salts. It's just $100 bill. Give me $100 bill. It's just $100 bill. Lying in your wallet. About to getting hungry here. I thought you said you wanted $100 bill. Give me all your $100 bills.
All right, boys, girls, and people not confined by the binary. Basically, our recording schedule for December and January had went out the window. You know, Christmas and the New Year hit us all like a truck, so we haven't had all the opportunity to get together and record some after shows. But we are planning to record a bunch of them next time we get together. So this is a call to action. If you would like to send us an email asking us questions or commenting on one of our episodes, feel free to email us at ovfeedback@gmail.com, and we will definitely talk about you. If you have a home brew or some local brew in your area that you think we might like to taste and you want to send it over, it doesn't have to be alcoholic. If you have some really sweet energy drink or juice or coffee or anything really that you think we would love to try or hate to try or would be different or anything like that, just send it over. Again, hit us up at ovfeedback@gmail.com to get our address and all that. Third thing that I want to say is if you produce music, or if anybody you know produces music, or if you do slam poetry or speeches or anything where you think you could contribute to our palate cleanser section, we want to feature music from our fans first. So if you have a little project where you're making music or speeches or, 2 to 5 minute things that say a point or have some kind of artistic intent or hell, even poetry, anything, just send it over to us and we'll love to stick it in. Otherwise, thank you for letting us into your ear holes once again this week. Thank you for letting us occupy your mind for nearly an hour. It's a blessing that not only do we get to get together, a few times a month and record some fun episodes and talk about weird shit, but we have a whole bunch of people that want to listen to us, and that's flattering as fuck. So Ood Gallifrey repeating himself again. Those fans of classic Occultae Veritatis know how long-winded I can be in the after show, because I like to gush. Anyways, Abuna Gallifrey, see you next time, hopefully with an after show, maybe not, but definitely next week there'll be a show dropping, and it should rock your shit. Have a good night.